Turbines to Speed. It's another edition of Ask Chuck Dixon. It's Wednesday morning. It's time for me to come to your PC or Mac or cell phone, Kindle, or whatever you're listening to this on. It's time for me to come and answer questions about what I do for a living. What I do for a living is I write comic books. I am Chuck Dixon. I am here to answer your questions, one and all. Paul Manoia. Which actor best portrayed Jack Ryan from the Tom Clancy movies TV show? Are you a fan of the book series? I think Harrison Ford nailed it. To my mind, Jack Ryan isn't, a superhero. He's kind of a, like a Washington insider. Like one of the people behind the scenes, one of those unelected bureaucrats. Yeah, I know he's a CIA officer, and it is officer, not agent. But I always feel like he's in over his head, and Harrison Ford is great at playing that in over his head character. Yeah, sure, he's capable physically and mentally of the job, but he's more of a think tank character guy. He's more of a sitting behind a desk or, analyzing data kind of character, to my mind. And Ford, is capable of playing that everyman type guy. Like I said, Jack Ryan's not a superhero in the books. The worst Ryan is Ben Affleck, because any character Ben Affleck plays is the worst portrayal of that character ever. The only two good Ben Affleck performances I've ever seen was once he was playing a stoner, and I don't think he was acting. And the other one was in Netflix's Triple Frontier, and which he gives an excellent, restrained performance. He's very convincing in the role as a burnout military vet. And I found out after watching the film that he was, when principal photography ended on that movie, he went into rehab. So it might explain why he was able to so effectively play a burnout, because he was burnt out. So, again, he probably wasn't acting. So, not a big Ben Affleck fan. Not an enormous fan of Tom Clancy either. I can see why people like these books, and it makes them feel like insiders, because Tom Clancy claimed to have access to classified information that others don't. If you ever talk to anybody involved with any of the, high-tech gear and secret methods and spycraft that he talks about, anybody who actually knows about this stuff will tell you he made a lot of it up. And as a guy who's written, my SEAL Team 6 books are kind of in the Tom Clancy vein. I had to make some stuff up too, because I was able to read about technologies that we use to hunt terrorists, but there aren't any details available on how these things work. I would know the name of the system and the basics. The rest I would have to make up. And hats off to Tom Clancy, because he was able to make this stuff up convincingly. I mean, I did it a few times on my SEAL Team 6 books, and it's not easy to write about something you have no idea what you're writing about, but write it with authority. Make it sound like you know what you're talking about. These things are a little too techno for me. The characters are kind of cardboard cutout. So not a big Tom Clancy fan, although I appreciate why people like the stuff. And, I don't hate things that I don't care for. I did read a few. I gave it a chance, but it's just not grounded in reality enough for me. I found them kind of bland, to tell you the truth. Now, also in defense of Tom Clancy, at least when he wrote about these political thrillers, about global terrorist threats or threats from communist regimes or whatever, at least he wrote about the actual enemies of America. The biggest thing I object to in adaptations of his work is that they substitute actual, radical Muslim terrorists, generally either for the Russian mafia or Illinois Nazis. So, the white guys are always the villain. They're very careful And Tom Clancy was not a PC kind of guy. And I'm sure he objected to all of this, although, they paid him so well. And when Hollywood buys your stuff, you have no control over it. But a lot of these stories lack any kind of urgency because they take place in this weird parallel universe where white militias are the most dangerous thing in the world. It's like the most recent season of Bosch on Amazon Prime, which was a series I was enjoying until the final series, in which they tried to say that the greatest threat facing Los Angeles, the citizens of Los Angeles, was libertarians. It's a little too woke, a little too PC for me. So hats off to Tom Clancy. A good writer, but just not a guy who writes my kind of stuff. Sphinx Ore. Are DC, etc. still selling in Europe? And if they have continued, is there a reason why this hasn't helped prop up their sales? DC is probably more in print in Europe than it is in the United States. You have a variety of languages. You have a customer base that's twice what the American customer base is. And, DC Comics are beginning to appear in Eastern Europe with great regularity, Hungary, Romania, Poland. And they sell well. I mean, I know from my own royalty statements back in the day, back in the 90s, I would see foreign royalty sales. And generally, I mean, in Italy alone, they matched U.S. sales of DC Comics. So you can only imagine, you multiply that by, Germany, the UK, France, the Scandinavian countries, Eastern Europe, and Turkey, so you're looking at huge sales. Now, they don't affect the sales numbers here in the United States, obviously, but they do remain in print, especially 70s through 90s stuff remains in print in sometimes absolutely beautiful editions, hardcover editions available at supermarkets, things like that. They're widely distributed, always in print. My Nightwing run, my Birds of Prey run, my Robin run, my Detective run are always in print in Europe somewhere in various editions. Spain is a huge market for me. I'm big in Europe. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, about affecting DC's bottom line. Well, back in the day, and I guess it's still true, DC, Marvel, any other publisher would sell the reprint rights in Italian, in German, in Spanish, in Swedish, in Norwegian, in Icelandic maybe. And they would sell the rights, the rights in those language by the page. So back in the 90s, I believe foreign publishers were paying $40 a page to reprint DC, Marvel, Eclipse, whatever company, Dark Horse. That's a pretty good deal for a European publisher with that size of an audience. $40 a page for the whole file. I mean, the color artwork, quite a deal. But not, it doesn't reflect sales. So DC, Marvel, the others, they were getting some coin each month from European publishers, but it was a flat rate, no matter how well those books did. Now, CrossGen, we worked deals with our foreign publishers that they would pay us based on sales. And I saw a few of those checks. It was probably the most highly profitable segment of CrossGen's revenue streams was foreign sales, because we were doing well over there. And we were in a lot of countries, and they were basically paying us a royalty rather than a flat page rate. I can imagine, imagine that if DC, Marvel, maybe they're doing this now, I don't know. But if DC and Marvel were to charge foreign publishers by a royalty rate, it would be great for foreign publishers because they would be getting the work effectively for nothing and then paying out of their profits. If there weren't any profits, they didn't have to pay for it. So no risk for the Europeans. Good deal for them. Better deal for DC and Marvel because I can imagine the foreign rights to these things based on royalties would be worth tens of millions of dollars a year or more. But, what do I know? All I do know, to go back to the subject, is that Marvel never paid international royalties. If they did, I could have retired off of Conan, because I think Conan was published in every language imaginable. And DC stopped paying international royalty rates in 2009. They did it without telling anybody. They just hoped we wouldn't notice. Okay, J.R. Nuto. When fans wrote into the Punisher War Journal letters page to request more street-level hero team-ups in late 90, early 91, a la Broadway Nights, editor Don Daly answers them in number 29 about a brand new Justice League of Vigilante Revengers, including Frank and Moon Knight and Bushwhacker, the team's first featured villain. Then nothing. Was this one of your pitches, and elements of it were the foundation of your Marvel Knights series? Yeah, I think that was all Don Daly, and I never heard about it. I didn't read the letters page, I guess, so I never heard about it. I didn't know that they were planning. He was planning a Punisher team. It's very likely that it wasn't Don Daly answering. Tim Toohey, his assistant at the time, may have been writing his replies, and Tim Toohey may have had some ideas. Tim Toohey always had a lot of ideas, and they're generally always good ideas. But that team up, that League of Vigilantes never happened, and was never brought up in any meeting I was at. So strictly letter page fodder. And that's what letter pages are. They are just filler space so the comics can be sent to subscribers by second-class mail. That's the only reason there is a letters page. And I don't believe they even have letters pages anymore. The internet did away with that. Am I not right about that? I haven't looked at a recent comic in a long time, so I don't know. But yeah, this was never thought of, and I probably would have opposed it anyway, because Punisher's not a joiner, which is kind of the basis of my Marvel Knights run. My Marvel Knights run was they basically said we want we want these characters teamed up. We want Daredevil, we want Punisher, we want the urban street level characters teamed up. And I thought, well, I'll put Punisher in, but he never really joins the team. He's not a joiner. He cooperates with them occasionally because of his total disdain for Daredevil. He's never going to be at the meetings. These characters are never going to sit around a table like the Justice League. It was probably the most fragile ensemble cast since the early Avengers run by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. People were always quitting or leaving or just not showing up. And that's kind of what I liked about it. Marvel Knights basically, despite what Joe and Jimmy wanted, Marvel Knights to me was my exploration, my personal exploration of the Marvel Universe, because I thought I may never get a chance to do this again. So I'm going to just make a shifting team, morphing team that's never the same from arc to arc of all my favorite Marvel characters. Because I may never get a chance to do it again. And I didn't. So it's a good thing I did it then. Got those 15 issues out of my system. Paul Riley. Many times when I'm looking for an old trade paperback collected story, it's out of print and being sold on eBay for $100 or $200. It makes me wonder, if people are willing to drop that much on a trade, why wouldn't Marvel or DC just get it back into print? The high price point proves there's a demand. Is there a reason they don't reissue it to make more money? Not the same reason they do anything. They don't really understand publishing. They don't understand how it works. They keep things like Watchmen in print constantly. And the reason for that is because if it ever went out of print for 5 years, the rights would revert to Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. It's really the only reason that Watchmen never goes out of print. But there are things, you have series that are perennial sellers. I mean, they're constantly reissuing Nightfall in some new edition. And so I can't complain there. But there's a lot of stuff that they shouldn't let go out of print, or they should repackage in different formats. There's no reason why, especially with the movies and television shows and things like that all the characters featured in them shouldn't have new trade paperback editions in print all the time. There's absolutely no reason for it because the material's there. In my earlier answer about Europe, I mean, in Europe they just keep these things in print constantly. They may put a new cover on it or a new format or recollate the collections or whatever. But generally, especially DC work, is constantly in print in Europe. I should also add in South America. I mean, 90s DC is so hugely popular in Mexico. I don't think any of it ever goes out of print because they're just perennial sellers, and new readers discover it, and the stuff from that era is just so enormously popular and seen as so iconic that it's always available to readers. Yeah, I don't get it myself. I just don't get it. And from what I see from upcoming schedules, the reprint, especially at DC, the reprint program is slowing way down. I got to wonder if they're not preparing. I know Random House does a lot of their distribution in the book market, and in a lot of cases does the packaging as well. I've got to wonder if eventually they're just not going to hand it all over to Random House. And once a real grown-up book publisher that likes to make money gets a hold of that material, I think it'll be Katie bar the door, and you'll see a lot more. You'll see a more robust printing schedule like you see in Europe. Check out what Eagle Moss does. Go online and check out what Eagle Moss does with the DC material. It's pretty staggering. You're going to be jealous. You're going to go, wow, why can't we have this kind of quality print, this kind of trade dress, this kind of uniformity and continuity in American, reprint editions? But I'm just warning you. You're just going to geek out over what Eagle Moss does with the DC material over there in their multi-volume sets. It's like encyclopedia of DC Comics. It's very cool stuff. Chewbacca's Lover. Wow. You talk a lot about adapting novels into comics, but what's your thoughts on adapting comic book stories into novels? There have been prose adaptations of Nightfall and No Man's Land that a lot of people grew up with without reading the comics they're based on. I mean, they have a place, obviously. This is what's known in publishing as added value. If you can take an already successful property, move it into another format that would attract a different set of readers. Now, it's added value if you turn comic books into prose. It's added value if you turn prose into graphic novels. It's added value if you do audio editions, if you do ebook editions. All of these things are basically taking the same material and reusing it in a different medium to make more cash. And there's nothing wrong with that. As far as these books, I never read any of these. I mean, and I was asked in the 90s if I wanted to write one, a Nightwing novel, and I took a shot at it, and it didn't interest me. I see these characters as comic book characters. I mean, that's how I see it. I'm not saying everybody should see it that way. If you like these novels, I mean, obviously, great. I mean, and it exposes it to a whole brand new audience. So I'm all for programs like this where you have these, action paperbacks and hardcovers featuring iconic superhero characters. Obviously, they're successful because they do a lot of it. But as a writer, it's nothing that ever attracted me. As a reader, it's nothing that ever attracted me because these are comic book characters to me. I want to see them. That's my medium for this. I write prose myself, but I'm not adapting. It's like movie tie-in books to me. Probably a real good payday. I mean, certainly a real good payday for a lot of writers, but not something I'd want to do myself. Because it would seem tedious. But there are writers who are very good at this stuff, who apparently enjoy it, because I don't think you can be good at something unless you are enjoying it. So, what can I say? Yeah, I just circled the wagons on that one, didn't I? Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with, all of it. It's very cool. I'm fine with like little golden books of the superheroes too. Anything to get these characters in front of a new audience who might actually one day pick up a real comic book. which is where I come in. King Kong. When you created Bane, was he designed to be Bruce's brother? That's something that kind of came up early at night in Nightfall. Once we'd introduced the character and it was apparent he was going to catch on with comic fans, that they had accepted him. I was the one that introduced the fact that, well, we don't know who his father is. That's a mystery. That's kind of built in. But what if it's a character we already know? And comic book people love those kind of continuity coincidences. That it's a character we already know instead of creating a new character. And really, at the end of a whodunit mystery, you don't want to find out who done it and go, I don't know who this guy is. So it had to be somebody we were familiar with. And so I came up with 3 candidates, one of which was Thomas Wayne, Bruce Wayne's father, who, I said, he spent some time in Santa Prisca, treating, the poor, dissidents or something. He was there with Doctors Without Borders, that kind of thing. And he could possibly have had a dalliance with Bane's mother and been the father of Bane. And all of this was revealed to not be true in an excellent arc in Batman Gotham Knights, written by my buddy Scott Beatty, who, I had, Scott and I told him, I said, we never did, or I never did get to the end of the mystery of who Bane's father was, and I knew it was King Snake. I hate to spoil that for you, but, Sir Dorrance, the King Snake, was Bane's father. And I forget the other candidate. There was a third candidate other than Thomas Wayne. But I also remember early on, we had discussed this, and then I think that Doug Mensch wasn't paying attention at that particular part of the meeting, where he skipped that class. And in a relatively early issue of Batman in the Nightfall run, he reveals who Bane's father was. And I caught it. None of the other editors caught it, but it was too late. It went out as part of the story. So we had to write some sort of lame excuse later on that wasn't true. That some Generalissimo or something, or some Che Guevara type that Doug had created was not Bane's father. That Bane's father was one of 3 possible candidates. And Scott, spent some time talking to me about where was I going with this story, and wrote this 3-issue arc to finish it up and solve the mystery of who was Bane's daddy. Michael Hutchison. He left DC for CrossGen around the same time all the editors were changing, and many of the writer-artists of the previous decades were being used less and less, and even the leadership of DC changed shortly afterward. He did return for a few stints here and there, a fill-in on Booster Gold. That was Dan Jurgens requested me for that. Thank you, Dan. Richard Dragon, Scott McDaniel requested me for that. Thank you. Connor Hawk, I don't remember who requested me for that. Bane, Outsiders, and the story that brought Stephanie back to life and redeemed Leslie Tompkins. Without burning any bridges, how was it different? And follow-up question, is it true an editor who clearly didn't know you tried to claim you were slow? No, it's not time for a twin spin. What are we doing here? Yeah, it really comes down to Dan DiDio. He was the difference. I mean, he ran the place. He micromanaged the place. Under Paul Levitz, under Jeanette Kahn, you didn't feel their thumb on the scales at any point. You didn't feel like the editors were talking through the editors to you. Each editor was allowed their own independent fiefdom. And they were there to, succeed or fail. And if you failed too bad, you had books taken away from you or demoted, rarely fired at DC. That kind of stuff would happen at Marvel. But for the most part, the editors were free to do, what they did, chart the course of their books, plan continuities, storylines, and all the rest of it. And very rarely would Paul or Jeanette before Paul step in and request something or request a change or have a suggestion or whatever. They were hands off, and more concerned with marketing and things like that, things outside of the editorial. And they had a great team of editorial. I mean, Mike Carlin, Denny O'Neil, Archie Goodwin, guys like that. They weren't going to fail you. They weren't going to drop the ball. They weren't going to fall asleep. And they were watching the sales as hard as, the people on the seventh floor. When Dan comes on board, he has to have a hand in everything. Everything. So every editor that talks to you, it's Dan is talking to you through them. And that was the biggest difference. And now I didn't feel it so much on things like, the Connor Hawke thing or the Dan Jurgens thing. But I did feel it when I was on Batman the Outsiders and Robin, which I'll deal with in the next question. But, the biggest thing was, Dan tried to do everybody's job for them, which is a problem because comics shouldn't be one size fits all. And I think that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to create consistency, and they sacrificed creativity for consistency. And every editor-in-chief has their own prejudices about how they see comics should be, but you've got to let go. I mean, even Jim Shooter, as commanding a figure and autocratic a figure as he was at Marvel, knew when to let an editor go when they were experiencing success and just let them fly with it. Dan almost seemed jealous of anyone who had any success unless he was part of it or he could claim it was his success. So that's my psychological profile. So yeah, as previewed, we do have a Michael Hutchison twin spin coming up here. What happened with your run on Outsiders? Well, again, it was Dan DiDio. I was up in New York. It was the last time I was in New York, 2008, I believe it was, and I went up to meet with a whole bunch of different publishers. So I spent like 3 days in the city, just going from publisher to publisher, having interviews. And I stopped in the DC offices just to see if there was anybody left there that I knew, and there really weren't many. And Dan DiDio heard I was in the building and came running over, because he was always running over and sticking his head in offices. It was like a whack-a-mole game. If someone new was in the offices, Dan had to stick his head out and talk to them. So he calls me in for a meeting. He wants to talk to me. I'm like, well, why does he want to talk to me? I had talked to him earlier and we didn't get along. And I talked to him right after I left CrossGen. I visited the offices, and we butted heads for a half hour before he threw me out. But anyway, he said, "You want to take over Batman and the Outsiders," which I had heard my good buddy Tony Bedard was going to write, and he's like, "No, we want to change direction." Tony had written like 3 issues and no drawing had done, but they're already ready to change direction. And so he's going to hire me. I think it was like a stunt thing, like he was showing off. Like, I'm just going to, this guy just happens to be in the office, and I'm just going to give him a book, because I can do that, because I'm Dan DiDio. So he gives me Batman and the Outsiders, and the thing is, the covers for like the first 4 issues are already done. So I had to write stories that reflected those covers, and they featured, the story's going to feature this renegade OMAC character, and I thought, well, let's call him Remac, because he's been like rebooted to be evil. And Dan actually liked that idea, Remac. That's a great idea. So I went sailing into it. I was having a great time. I was having an awesome time, lots of fun, and I had a great art team. And I liked my editor and my assistant editor, and everything seemed to be going great. And then they called and they wanted me to do Robin. They wanted me to return to Robin and basically bring Spoiler back into the continuity after she had been tortured to death by Bill Willingham, and also redeem the character of Leslie Tompkins, the Gotham physician, who I believe was one of the few people who knew Bruce Wayne was Batman. I can't remember that part of it. So they wanted spoiler back, Leslie Tompkins. Those were my marching orders, and any way I went about that was up to me, I thought. And I ran into a lot of micromanaging here, and I found out there was a whole new post-production process that had been introduced to comics since I had been at DC, since I had left DC. And because the comics were digitized before being sent to the publisher, this allowed them to move things around, and this allowed primarily Dan DiDio a chance to monkey with everything. And if he couldn't monkey with it to his satisfaction, he paid for rewrites. And this was unheard of in comic, paid for rewrites, because none of these rewrites were my fault. He wanted things put in the story that he thought of after the story was written, so they paid for rewrites. But still, things seemed to be going along swimmingly. Everybody seemed to be happy until I even was doing store appearances to support this stuff, and I started to get that comfortable feeling that no freelancer should ever get. That I'm good. I got 2 monthlies at DC. This is fun. I'm enjoying this. I liked revisiting the universe and the characters and all the rest of it. And then I get the phone call from my editor that I've been fired from both books. And I, of course, said, why? Why, stop writing. Your services are no longer required. And I'm like, why? And he says, I can't tell you. I'm like, you can't tell me why. He says, because I've been ordered not to tell you why you've been fired. And I'm like, well, that's a mystery. So I tried to call Dan and talk to him, but he wouldn't answer my calls. He wouldn't return my calls. And I remember the assistant editor was actually crying the last time she talked to me. She was crying because she was so upset at me being fired from both of the books, because they were both being edited by the same team. And I thought, wow, this is really bizarre. And then the writers who took over my runs, Frank Thierry on Outsiders and Fabian Nicienza on Robin, both contacted me to apologize for taking over my position. And they didn't feel good about it. And I said, well, look, it's not your fault. I've taken over books from other people, and I felt the same way. But there's no need to. We're all professionals here. Although to this day, I really don't know why, except that the only thing I can think of, and I thought of this in recent months, was I did what I always do. They put me on a book, I started writing. And I wrote, to the point where when they fired me, they had $30,000 in scripts that would never use, that they had paid me for. And I think I was turning out work too fast for Dan DiDio to micromanage. He couldn't keep up with me. So he had to get rid of me because my speed was taking me beyond his ability to control. And I think that might be the reason. But I could be wrong. So now, back to Dan DiDio, you had asked in the previous question, Hutch, that an editor thought I was slow. Dan had been told I was slow, and he'd been told I was slow by a couple of editors who didn't care for me, who basically took every chance at every editorial meeting to, cut down my reputation. They said I was difficult to work with, that I in crossovers and things like that, I made trouble, so, and I wasn't reliable, and I didn't have my work in on time, none of which were true. And the most shocking thing to me is there were people at those editorial meetings that knew better. I was told about this by an editor who was at these meetings, and I'm like, well, why doesn't anybody say that they're lying? Chuck's reputation is he's extraordinarily flexible. He's been involved in the biggest money-making crossovers we've ever done at this company. He's been at the center of some of them. He's written some of these crossovers, designed them, and guided them. And slow, my reputation was, Bob Greenberger, who used to send out the deadline calendars, stopped sending me deadline calendars. And I asked him why, and he said, because it's irrelevant. By the time I send it to you, you've already done all the work on the calendar. So, because I was working 6 months, sometimes a year ahead of schedule. I wrote so much for DC in 1 year that they told me to basically slow down, stop writing. We can't keep paying you on these titles because we're like into next year's budget. This can't be. So this is why I only ever worked exclusive for DC 1 year, because they simply couldn't give me enough work. They could not keep up with my output. Okay. I hope that's all your questions. As far as burning bridges, they've all been burnt, my friend. Burnt my bridges, sunk my boats. There's no going back. Tim Gilpin. I enjoyed your run on Nightwing for many reasons, including the setting. Bloodhaven was a fully realized city, not a copy of Gotham. When you created Bloodhaven, did you use real-life cities such as Philadelphia and Baltimore for inspiration? Also, how much did you collaborate with Scott McDaniel on Bloodhaven's visual depiction? I'm going to answer your first question first. Bloodhaven was, the name was created by, I believe, Scott Peterson. I wanted to name the town Drescher, because I thought it sounded real low down, blue collar. But Scott Peterson wanted to call it Bloodhaven, I think because he liked saying it, because he would say Bloodhaven. He would lean into the umlaut. We all loved the umlaut over the U. So, and it was up to me to create it. And I thought, well, I don't want Bloodhaven to be like Gotham, like you said. It can't be like Gotham. So it's got to be a town that never had a chance. I mean, I think we all understand that Gotham was a once proud, wonderful, fabulous city, a shining city on the hill, a fabulous metropolis filled with happy people that fell on darker times. That Gotham City is a reduced city. It is a city whose grandest days are behind it, and his future is bleak. Well, I wanted to make Bloodhaven, which is a city which never had good days. It never had a grand history to look back upon. And so I created Bloodhaven, which was originally a whaling town, which of course it was doomed because the whaling industry falls apart. And then it becomes a town that embraces asbestos, the asbestos industry, as its next best chance to be a thriving community. And of course, that ended in tears. And eventually it just becomes a city that is forgotten. It's one of those cities you drive by, but you never get off the exit to go visit. And it's collapsed. It's in ruins. It's like, it's a nightmare town, like so many urban centers have become today. I didn't mean to be prescient, but there's a lot of Bloodhavens in the United States now. Now, as far as Scott McDaniel's contribution, I couldn't have done it without him. I could not have done it without him. First of all, Scott, just action master, great cartoonist, great, he can, and I mean cartoonist in the best sense of the word. He also has an engineering degree, so he has the mind of an engineer, and I mean that in the best sense of the word. He was able to design Bloodhaven as a believable place, mostly due in part for his ability to do drawings that had 23 points of perspective. I mean, his background work is flawless, and he has this terrific visual memory. So he was able to draw all the crazy landscapes of Bloodhaven, because it is crazy. It's a town crisscrossed by overpasses and cloverleafs and everything else. It's a nightmare town for traffic. And that's how I described it in the original descriptions. A little bit more on that later. But I couldn't have done it without Scott. I mean, he really made Bloodhaven a living place. And no matter what crazy kind of building or architecture or angle I asked for, he was able to deliver 110%. I remember we had a shopping mall that was in the shape of a whale. and he just killed it. It's just totally believable. I mean, it could have been utterly ludicrous, and it was. I mean, it was ludicrous in concept, but in execution, he made it look like a believable place. This derelict, rundown mall shaped like a big old Moby Dick. Now, as far as what towns I based it on, there's a Philadelphia neighborhood, and it's almost a separate town on its own, because it's separated from Philadelphia by a number of geographical elements. It's a town called Manayunk. Now, Manayunk is nothing like Bloodhaven, or it wasn't last time I was there. It's a kind of a blue-collar town, but it's a neat place. It's got, some, He used to have this artsy retail district and everything else. It's very much it's like Brooklyn for Philadelphia. And I imagine today, I mean, I haven't been there literally in decades, but I imagine today it's probably pretty upscale, the way Brooklyn is now. And the distinguishing feature of Manayunk that makes it similar to Bloodhaven is it's separated from most of the city by hills, and it's also separated by the Schuylkill River. And there's a canal that goes past it, which is an interesting feature that comes off the Schuylkill. There's no port in Manayunk, so no ships dock there, even though it's a river town. Right, it's right on the river. Also, the Schuylkill Expressway, which goes to the Pennsylvania Turnpike, bypasses Manayunk. It's hard to get off the Schuylkill Expressway and get to Manayunk. You kind of have to get off, miles before and go down the West River. I don't want to get into all the detail, but it bypasses. And then there's a train line with no train station for Manayunk. Can't take the train to Manayunk. So it's hard to get to Manayunk, which I think people in Manayunk like, because that's how it's isolated from the rest of Philadelphia. That's the feature I wanted for Bloodhaven. I wanted a town that you drove past. Nobody ever got off. So the I-95 blew past it, trains blew past it, everybody blew past Bloodhaven, but nobody gets off. And that's what I wanted. And they had so little regard for the citizens of Bloodhaven that they just built elevated highways right through the center of town. They just didn't give a damn. So you could just, blast through and look around at how dismal it was, but never get off. It's like if you ride the train and you see some great landscape going up and down the eastern seaboard, but you see some pretty miserable places too. And a lot of that was inspiration for Bloodhaven. Another town that inspired Bloodhaven was it's a town called Reading, Pennsylvania, which again isn't like Bloodhaven, except the fact that it's kind of a hard luck town. Reading, Pennsylvania is about an hour and a half outside of Philly, and it's another town that was made more difficult to get to. If you've ever played Monopoly, you'll see one of the railroads is the Reading Railroad. The Reading Railroad used to run from Center City, Philadelphia, into the center of Reading. And people used to commute. They used to live in Reading and work in Philadelphia. People would visit Reading to go shopping and things like that. And for some reason, the politicians decided that they were going to do away with the railroad. I never quite understood why. And the people of Reading let them. They were sold a bill of goods that somehow taking the railroad away would make this town better. And what happened to Reading after the railroad was taken up is it kind of dried up. I lived in the region for a while, and it was sad to go to downtown Reading because it was just people sitting around on benches looking like they wonder what happened. And lots of boarded up businesses because nobody was going there anymore except local residents. And of course, malls helped kill it. So it was kind of a no luck blue collar town, full of great people who deserved better, quite frankly. And so again, Reading serves as an inspiration for Bloodhaven, but it's nowhere near as miserable as Bloodhaven. Now, Camden, New Jersey is every bit as miserable as Bloodhaven, and I haven't been in Camden in a long time, but I don't think it's changed. Things like this usually don't. I think if Camden had a revival, we would have heard about it. Give you an example. Camden, New Jersey is right across the river from Philadelphia, and you can look across the Delaware River from Philly and see basically darkness. It's like looking from South Korea into North Korea. If you're over on the Camden side, you see Philadelphia, all the bright lights. It's a beautiful city at night. You look over at Camden, and it's like Berlin, 1945. The best example I can think of to tell you what Camden was like, there's a Catholic church in Camden that only gets visited at Christmas time. They hold Mass every week, but people who used to live in Camden return for Christmas Mass, usually midnight Mass, and they're so generous with their donations that one Mass keeps the church alive for the whole year. And it's a tough parish, as you might imagine. And I saw an interview, this was in the early 80s, with the new parish priest. And he was as grizzled an Irishman as you could possibly imagine. This guy looked like an ex-prize fighter. He had white hair. He looked like he was in his 70s. He might have been in his 50s. But just think of the toughest, punch-drunk Irish priest you can possibly imagine. And they asked him why he accepted to be the pastor of the Catholic Church in Camden. And he said, it was either this or hell. I can only imagine the backstory on that one, but he was perfectly serious. And that's Camden, and that's Bloodhaven. So there you go. Hey, if you have questions, suggestions, you just want to talk to me, maybe you want to show me some artwork, or whatever, contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. That's brunobookstore@gmail.com for those of you who are only listening to this. It's the most direct way to get a hold of me. Of course, you can comment right below this video. Sometimes I miss them. Or you can comment on Facebook. I miss a lot of them. But the most direct way to get a hold of me is at brunobookstore@gmail.com. And yeah, I know you're tired of hearing about it, but if you haven't checked out ArcToons, you really need to. I got a whole bunch of series running. My Sister Suprema is apparently very popular. So ArcToons is a free digital platform. It's high res. You can read these comics on your big screen TV in your living room, media room, family room, or den. But you can also read it on your phone, your laptop, your Kindle, your tablet, your PC, your Mac, whatever. Eventually we're going to have these comics projected on the moon. So everyone has to read them. It's free. Go check it out. There's a genre for everybody. There's humor, there's horror, there's espionage, there's crime. There's lots of superheroes, science fiction. If there's a genre you like, chances are it's there. Maybe not Westerns. I'm gonna do a Western, I promise. But new episodes every week. Lots of fun. Top creators. We're well up over 2 million views now and growing fast. So join the club and check us out. I know you'll like it. And thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for spreading the word. And I'll see you all down the road.